So right after the British reforms, the Indians were generally not happy, although some of these reforms were really good because they put an end to some really cruel practices like the remarriage to widows, the sati system, and the outdated Indian education system. And some reforms were required, which were appropriate, but generally the change of religion, the change of language, the heavy taxation, discrimination, abolishment of industries, handicrafts, these particular reforms caused the anger of Indians. They were not happy, and they started uprising against the British government, because obviously it was high time that the Indians uprose for their own rights to defend themselves, to defend their culture and religion. So the War of Independence of 1857 started because of many reasons, many short-term and long-term reasons. So generally, we categorize the reasons for the War of Independence into two groups: the short-term reasons and then the long-term reasons. The long-term reasons are basically these reforms that have built up over time. These problems that were becoming so huge that things were getting out of the hands of the British. They were not able to control anything anymore, right? So beyond this, there were certain short-term reasons as well, and those short-term reasons mean that there were some immediate problems that propagated the War of Independence. For example, we're going to study those reasons right now, short term and long term. This is a question that summarizes the entire reasons for the War of Independence. It was caused by the greased cartridges incident. This was a short term cause. Give reasons why you might agree or disagree with this statement. So they're asking whether this was the most important reason or not, and then give your other reasons. So this question is going to start from the grease cartridges incident, which is the short term reason. So what happened in the Greece cartridges incident was that the British introduced this new Lee Enfield rifle, which had these cartridges that were covered with cow and pig fat. And for the soldiers to use those cartridges, they had to bite it off. They had to tear the cartridge off by their mouth. And because cow was sacred for Hindus and pig was forbidden in Islam, Muslim and Hindu soldiers, they both refused to touch the cartridges. And because of this refusal, the British imprisoned some of the Indian sepoys, and this angered the Indians that like if it's like culturally inappropriate for them the soldiers, why would the British um imprisoning them on that? So upon this, some of the Indian soldiers they broke in the prison and they released their fellow prisoners, and they also killed some British officers. And because of this, an immediate war broke out. A lot of anarchy spread throughout the area's subcontinent, and this became an immediate cause for the War of Independence. Okay. Then the second reason, doctrine of lapse, is one of the long-term reasons of the independence, the reform of 1852, when the British government introduced this policy to take over lands of anyone that had no ownership, natural ownership of that land. Um, yeah, just a second, guys. Sorry, guys. So yeah, the Doctrine of Lapse of 1852 was a long-term cause for the War of Independence. It was introduced by General Lord Dalhousie, and it stated that any Indian without a natural hire of their land, that particular land would go under the British control. Um, and they did took over they did take over Jhansi, Nagpur, Satara, some of the very important Indian areas. And it was already something that was not acceptable by the Indians, so it became one of the long-term reasons for this war as well. Then the British interference in the religion of the Indians, banning Parda and Sati. Parda culture in Islam was extremely important for the Muslims of that time. So banning that was another religious attack on Islam, and banning Sati was a religious attack on Hinduism. So, this all of these religious reasons also became um, some long-term causes for the War of Independence. Then the discriminative behavior, all of the reforms that we were studying yesterday in the essay of the British reforms, you can write those things as the cause of the War of Independence as well. Okay, whereas considering themselves superior to the Indians, treating them harshly as an inferior race with fewer job opportunities, um, so this hatred continued to grow gradually in them, and which definitely led to the War of Independence. The British also disgraced the royal family and which also greatly infuriated the Indians. The royal family was the Mughal family, and they moved them from Red Fort to Qutub Sahib Shrine. Nobody can order the royal family to change their place in a country. So it was like the Red Fort was where they lived, and had the legacy of living since forever. So, and then they just like ordered them to move to a new place, which was again not acceptable. So this superiority complex that the British had was becoming a reason for this rebellion. Foreign battles, these foreign campaigns, British were also having these war campaigns in other parts of the world, um, enlisting Indian soldiers in their own campaigns. Soldiers were dying just because of these British wars, with little or no gain to the Indians. So basically, this also became another cause. And then the last and final blow was the Persian and Sanskrit's replacement with English as the official language, English schools, an entire social shift, which was not acceptable by the Hindus as well as the Muslims. Indians were not ready to send their children to schools where Christianity was taught to them. So this really offended them, and hence they started rebelling against the British government. So this entire question, starting with the Greece cartridges incident into the doctrine of lapse, to the discriminative behavior, to the British superiority, and so many other things combined, um, became the reasons for the War of Independence. And the Indians, they uprose, they started uprising in different parts of India, in different groups, under leadership of different local leaders. Some of them were united, most of them were not. The Indians, in the first attempts, they were to an extent successful in gaining some of the territories, but unluckily, they lost those territories back, and the British regained most of the territories once again. And the War of Independence, instead of being a success, became a big failure in the Indian history. And yeah, so the British government there, they rule further. It got strengthened in the subcontinent, and they continued as the official colonizers of the India. That was the result of this War of Independence. So far, guys, any questions? Anything that is not clear? Anything that you guys are confused in? Just let me know now.
No, sir.
No? What about the others, guys? Anika, Naval, Emma, Tanya. Are you guys
Yes,
good?
sir.
Yes. Are you all there? I hope nobody's sleeping.
No questions.
No? Okay, I'm good. I'm glad. I'm glad. Perfect. Uh, okay. So at times these lectures um can be pretty boring when there's a lot of detail that we're just doing and there's just one-way communication and I'm just continue. And I'm just like explaining a particular question. So, guys, just try to be awake and try to ask questions, try to indulge in conversations so we can keep the class interesting. Okay, so you guys are also like able to share your perspectives on whatever we're studying here. Because, at this point, for this question, they stated that the Greece cartridges incident was the most important reason. But you guys are free to disagree, by the way, because at the end of this, these 7 reasons, we also have to write an evaluation, and that evaluation will be your agreement or disagreement with the question statement. If you think the Greece cartridge incident was the most important cause, you're going to write in the evaluation that it was the most important cause with maybe 2, 3 lines of summary and justifying your statement. If you think some other reason was most important, you're going to write that. So I want to hear from you guys. What do you guys think? Which reason out of all of these reasons that we've just studied was the most immediate and most important cause of the War of Independence? Um,
Changing their languages.
Change in the languages, and how would you say that?
So since they were living with the same language as their like main language, and
Mm-hmm.
suddenly somewhere out of nowhere wanted to change that, so it would be a cause.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you can maybe justify it by saying that a language is associated with the ways of living. You generally the language you speak is your culture, is your lifestyle, is how you think of certain things, is how you practice religion. Yeah. So if you got to change the language, that means you're changing an entire lifestyle. This is why it was the most important reason. Yeah. Isra, this is how we can justify it. What about the others, guys? What do you guys think? Which was the most important reason?
Greece cartridges,
Okay. And how would you justify that?
because this was the instant cause of it.
Yes, you can say that it became the most immediate cause and the war actually started because of this. So hence it was the most important one. Okay, correct. What else?
The mistreatment of the Mughal emperor
Mistreatment of the royal family. Uh-huh. And how would justify?
because he acted like uh, an important symbolic figure.
Hmm.
And
Yeah, so the Mughal family was the main uniting force for the Indians, and insulting them was like insulting Indians. So yes, this was another reason. So you guys see, all of you have different ideas, and all of those ideas are correct. Like Hamza saying that the grease cartridges was the most important reason, and justifying that correctly, correct. Anika agreeing to the Mughal emperor's point is also correct. Dania saying the language point is also correct. You see, all of you guys, whatever you guys think is absolutely true. There's no wrong answer. You just have to justify yourself. The examiners are open to all kinds of ideas. From all of these reasons, whatever reason you think was the most important, you have to justify. You just have to justify yourself. And if you're able to do that, the reasons that I'm telling you after all of your messages, so after all of your like, these ideas, the reasons, the justifications that you write in your evaluation is will be will s- will be the most important factor the examiner checks and sees how well you're able to present your point. So there's no wrong answer. You just have to justify yourself correctly. Okay. Then, lack of unity was the most important cause of failure of the War of Independence. Do you agree? Give reasons for your answer. This is another 14-mark question, and it asks you to assess the reasons for the failure of the war. Now, for the failure of the War of Independence, there were many reasons, including the lack of unity. The Indians were not united for the war. There was lack of leadership. There was no objective for the rebellion. There was no support from the local population. So many reasons combined, the war failed. Let's quickly go over these reasons. The first one being the lack of unity. The war did break out in different in all parts of India, But most of the Indians did not support the rebels, like the ruler of Kashmir. He sent his forces to help the British. Now, this became one of the reasons for the defeat because even the local leaders were not supporting. They were helping the British out, you see. Then uh, this lack of leadership. Bahadur Shah too was not an effective leader. He was a Mughal emperor, but he was not an effective leader who could maybe guide the Indians to this rebellion. And most of the people in his army were traitors and spies of British. So lack of effective leadership and lack of immediate guide of the Indians was a reason for the failure. Then different objectives. Rebels were fighting for different purposes. Some of the princes in the princely states were fighting for their own power. Hindus and Sikhs did not want the restoration of Mughal Empire because Mughals were generally the Muslim family, and Hindus and Sikhs were fighting for their own rule. Muslims were fighting to restore their Mughal Empire. So everyone had different purposes. Nobody was fighting on a common goal, on a common agenda. That became a reason for the failure of the war. Then Lord Canning's conciliatory policy, this said that anyone who would stop fighting would be given a chance to be forgiven. And this policy was a result. This policy resulted in so many people who stopped fighting, who separated from the rebellion, and this weakened the Indian force. This literally crushed the British. Mm, so, sorry, this crushed the Indians because they were most of them just stopped fighting because of this policy. Then local population did not support them. They saw their lives, their families, their properties in danger. So again, Indians were heavily outnumbered by the British. Um, Another reason was that the British at that time were too powerful. They ruled over the entire India. They were so well trained with clever war strategies, war tactics, superior weaponry. On the other hand, the Indians were weak. They had old weaponry, weak strategies. They were not well trained. So there was no match for the British, and hence they were easily defeated. Okay, and then there was no strategic planning on the Indian side. There was no clear line of action. Fighting was taking place in different areas. Instead of having like an organized rebellion from city to city, multiple rebellions were breaking out in different cities, and hence conclusion was in front of you. The Indians got defeated. The territories that were even lost by the British were easily regained in the second attempt. So yeah, yes, War of Independence was a failure, and all of these reasons combined. Now, once we write all of these reasons, starting from the first one, which is about the most important cause for the failure, being lack of unity. You start with that on level three and then progress to level four with all of the other six reasons, and then your evaluation at the end. Your evaluation would again be your agreement, disagreement with one of the reasons is the most important. If you think lack of unity was the most important reason, you write that and justify it. If you think any other reason was the most important one, you clearly state your reason that you think was the most important and justify it properly. Guys, any questions?
So in 40 markers, we have to get 6 reasons and then the ending part.
Seven reasons, the ending part. Seven reasons, including the reason that they write down in the question statement.
Okay.
So, this next part is about the War of Independence achieved nothing. Do you agree? Generally, this question is asking you to analyze the successes and the failures. They're saying that the War of Independence was like how successful this war was. This is another type of 14 markers where you're asked to analyze the successes and the failures of a particular incident. Now, if you think the War of Independence was a failure, you will be writing four failures and three successes. If you think War of Independence was a success, you will be writing four successes and three failures. Now, the ratios that you want to create are up to you, considering on which side you agree with. Generally, the War of Independence was a failure because main objective of it to overthrow British was not achieved. So you will obviously be writing it as a failure. So we can say that let's start with so obviously your question would start from the side that you agree with. If you think when the war was a failure, you're gonna start writing the failures at level 3, and then the successes at level 4. Okay, so over here we're gonna say that the most important failure of the War of Independence was that the Indians, they failed to drive the British out of India. You know, the main objective of the war, it was to overthrow the British, to restore the Indian rule. They failed, and the British were victorious. Then the second failure was the official end to the Mughal rule in India. Queen Victoria proclaimed herself as the official Queen of India. It was done in the proclamation of Allahabad at the end of the War of Independence. This was one result of this war. And, the greatest dynasty, the Mughals that ruled for 300 years, were now no more the rulers. The British were. Third failure was that Hindu Muslim and the British relations were strained forever. British blamed Muslims for the War of Independence. Muslims and Hindus were not on good terms. Number of jobs for Indians were significantly reduced. Properties were taken over by force. So it was very, um, you know, it was an extremely harsh period of social and economic decline for the Indians. Then the status of Muslims became low after the War of Independence. Muslims, the Hindus, they did accept the British rule, but the Muslims were extremely resentful. They were not interested in getting the British education because of the changes in religion and language. Hindus did accept some of these things to an extent, but the Muslims did not. So it further became a problem for the Muslims in the subcontinent because if one side, like even from the Indians, if one of the communities was ready to accept the ideas, the other was not. So yeah, the British were they were definitely not on good terms with the Muslims. So four reasons became the reasons for the failure. Then there were certain achievements as well for the wars. For example, EIC rule came to an end. EIC had done so much of misgovernment, mismanagement. They started taking bribes and gifts from from the Indians. The British, they did remove EIC from politics. They were just left as traders, some company that was only responsible for trade in India and nothing more than that. Okay.
Okay.
Uh, yeah. Then the abolishment of doctrine of lapse. This was another success. This policy that was there to just unfairly take over different lands of the subcontinent, but that policy was gone. It was no more part of the reform of the subcontinent. So yeah, and after that, the Greece cartridges supply was also stopped, which was an immediate cause for the war. British realized that it was a mistake introducing these cartridges because the religion of the Indians was greatly affected, and hence the cartridges were also the supply was stopped. So yeah, with three successes where a lot of failures, the War of Independence ended up as a failed rebellion, which achieved absolutely, I would not say nothing, but very less because major objective, which was to overthrow the British, was not achieved. Your evaluation at the end would, if you've written four failures and three successes, like what they've written in the question, your evaluation at the end would be um, an agreement with the failures that this is why the war failed because it achieved nothing. The main purpose of it was to overthrow British, but it was not achieved, so it failed. Yeah, so guys, we're done with the War of Independence. I hope everything is clear.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Tomorrow we will study geography.
Yes, geography. Uh, Now, guys, we will be doing an assignment. We will be starting off with the assignment right now, but I'm sure it will take some time, so we'll take some more time to complete it as a homework. Let me just end the recording here.